The evening fell heavily on the quiet streets, the air thick with the staleness of a world lost in the seduction of relativism. Everywhere, people whispered the same phrase, "There are no absolute truths." It echoed in classrooms, courtrooms, and coffee shops, latching onto the minds of those too eager to embrace an easy escape from moral responsibility. The world had grown tired of anchors, tired of the weight of discernment, and so it clung to the intoxicating promise of a truthless horizon. From a corner cafe, a figure observed the movement of the city. His eyes, not yet dulled by the swirling confusion of a world enthralled by convenience, bore witness to a creeping fog. A fog that blurred lines, that softened the edges of right and wrong until there was no distinction between the two. The belief in no absolute truths was celebrated, lauded as a kind of liberation from the tyranny of judgment, a freedom to be whatever one desired, without consequences. But was it really freedom? The figure knew otherwise. He had seen it before, in the lives of those who adopted this newfound creed. At first, it seemed like the ultimate gift or release from the weight of hard decisions, of moral dilemmas. People moved without fear, without guilt. But then, inevitably, they found themselves adrift, their lives untethered, with no North Star to guide them. With nothing to hold on to, they floundered in the chaos they had once called freedom. He thought of those who had walked this path, how their pursuit of self-determined truth had often led them to destruction. For what does it mean when nothing is true? When the good is just a matter of preference, and the bad is merely an opinion? When the bonds that tie us to each other, love, trust, and duty, become negotiable, mutable things, subject to the whims of the moment? Society, in its quest to sever itself from the chains of moral absolutism, had instead imprisoned itself in the chains of moral anarchy. He remembered a time, not so long ago, when men and women understood that to live was to strive for something greater than themselves. They understood that morality was not a creation of the human mind, but a reality woven into the fabric of existence itself. It was not subjective, not the product of fleeting human desires, but a reflection of the nature of things. To live in accordance with this reality was to live rightly, to turn away from it was to descend into madness. Yet here they were, in a world that had convinced itself otherwise. The world had become enamored with its own cleverness, drunk on the belief that they could mold reality to their liking. They declared that truth was whatever they wished it to be, and they molded it, shaped it, bent it until it fit their desires. In doing so, they forgot that truth cannot be bent without breaking something fundamental in the soul. The figure stirred in his chair, watching as people passed by, unaware of the precipice beneath their feet. For without truth, without absolutes, there was no foundation. There was no ground on which to stand. The very act of standing became impossible, for if everything was fluid, if everything was in motion, then there could be no footing. One could only drift, carried by the tides of fashion, of impulse, of power. In the end, the denial of absolute truths is not an assertion of freedom but an abdication of responsibility. It is a coward's retreat, a refusal to face the world as it is, with all its harshness, its demands, its weight. It is a rejection of the hard work of discerning right from wrong, a refusal to engage in the struggle of moral clarity. And what is left, when this struggle is abandoned? What remains when men and women stop caring about what is true, about what is just? The figure smiled, though it was a smile tinged with sorrow. There would always be those who embraced the lie, who clung to the comforting illusion of relativism. But there would also always be those who saw through it, who recognized that the truth, far from being a burden, was the only thing that could truly set them free. True freedom, after all, did not lie in the absence of constraints, but in the alignment of the soul with the reality of things, with the nature of good and evil, right and wrong. The cafe grew quieter as the evening deepened. The figure stood, paying for his coffee. He walked out into the night, knowing that the battle would continue. The battle for truth, for clarity, for meaning. And though the world might turn its back on absolutes, there would always be those who stood firm, who knew that without truth, there was nothing. Without truth, the world was adrift, and the only hope lay in those who dared to anchor themselves, not in the shifting sands of relativism, but in the solid ground of what is real, what is true, what is good.